Arab don't respect us. Arab don't give us our right. The Arab don't give us our dignity. They don't see us as people. Don't respect us. The Arab don't give us our right. The Arab don't give us our dignity. They don't see us as people.
The trouble between North and South started in August 1955.
Joseph Lagu, who became one of southern Sudan's most famous rebel leaders, remembers the first shot fired in what eventually led to 50 years of conflict. A company of southern soldiers refused orders from their northern officer, who then shot one of them in the arm as a warning to obey.
That initial shot made the soldiers to disperse from there, disorderly. They went into the arms store, broke the arms store, took weapons, and then started shooting their northern commanders that they could get hold of. And after finishing off with them, they went into the town and then started killing any northern Sudanese they can find.
Most of the people are working for separation, that they have to separate from the north. Enough is enough.
Across town, in the rundown suburb of Mayo, the removal truck has arrived at the house Moses Taban and his wife Deborah share with their extended family. Having arrived in the north at an early age, Moses claims he was discriminated against almost from the beginning.
مجرد ما ودوني في مدرسة قالوا لأبوي ولدك ده بيقرأ دين بتاع كفار وبعدين بيقرأ إنجليزي. نحن هنا ما عندنا إنجليزي وما عندنا دين بتاع كفار، ولدك ده لازم يقرأ تربية إسلامية. مشينا للوزارة، الناس الوزارة قالوا لا ترجع، المدير بتاعت المدرسة ده بيحل لك أي مشكلة. رجعنا للمدير بتاعت المدرسة برضه رفض. قعدت درست تربية إسلامية وسقطت بس في تربية إسلامية، قال لي تعود شنو؟ ثالثة تاني.
Sadiq al-Mahdi was the last democratically elected Prime Minister of the Sudan.
The slave trade is a matter of tragic history, and it is something that represents a dark aspect of past humanity. But what we need to apologize for is the association in the north, in our culture, in the north, between blackness and slavery.
The then Prime Minister, Abdallah Khalil, negotiated a handover of power to the military. He invited Ibrahim Aboud, General Ibrahim Aboud, to take over power.
A war had begun years earlier in the south.
We started action exactly on 19th of September 1963. We started with our bare hands. I myself entered the bush with machete in my hand. I had no gun. I had 3 old guns which I gave to my company commanders. I organized the guerrilla army and called it Anyanya. Anyanya is name of a poison which is used by some tribes, including my own, Madi tribe, and it is a deadly poison. If it touches you, or it is given to you in water or in food, there is no medicine for it.
The Anyanya rebellion became a civil war lasting almost 9 years and brought Joseph Lagu into a direct confrontation with an old army colleague, Jafar Numeri, who led a military coup in 1969.
I knew him since 1960 here in Juba. As he took power in Khartoum, I found myself also in charge of the movement in the bush. And when the effect of our fighting was biting and so forth, he made a pronouncement, one of his main pronouncement, that South Sudan is a distinct region of the Sudan, and the people living there have their right to self-rule. I said, if someone has recognized what I am fighting for, then what is now left is to seek a way to have meaningful dialogue with him.
A peace accord was signed in 1972 in Addis Ababa. It gave the South autonomy in everything except national matters such as defense and foreign affairs. Joseph Lagu became vice president, and 10 years of relative peace followed, the longest in modern Sudanese history. But unknown to the general public, a quiet revolution which had started in the corridors and debating societies of Khartoum University in the early 60s was beginning to wield influence in political circles. The key figure to emerge was a man who would eventually pull the country onto a path of strict Islamic principles, who would orchestrate military coups, and who is blamed by many in the South for creating laws which led to the Second Civil War, in which over 1 million people died. His name, Hassan al-Turabi. He first came to prominence as a student leader coordinating street protests, which led to the overthrow of the Aboud military government in 1964.
And from the university, we staged a revolution, a popular uprising, and the army later on joined the people. Oh, every general strike, everyone is in the street.
Civilian government lasted just 5 years before being replaced in another military coup, which brought the left-wing Colonel Jafar Numeri to power. Turabi was imprisoned and then sent into exile. Over the years that followed, Numeri swung from initially being aligned to the communists through Arab nationalism to Pan-Africanism, and finally in the late 1970s, sensing a mood change in the country, he began to embrace political Islam.
When he saw that the Islamic fundamentalists were a political factor, he changed into Islamic fundamentalism. He was that sort of man.
Numeri played the populist card by turning strongly towards political Islam.
Oh yes, he did. And he was of course very jealous of us. He did not want Islam to be related to us, because we were the only ones who were championing the cause of Islam.
Numeri invited Turabi back to Khartoum and appointed him to the powerful post of Attorney General. They then set about dismantling the Addis Ababa Agreement, which had granted the South autonomy. It was at this point that John Garang, a protege of Joseph Lagu from the Anyanya days, and now a senior officer in the Sudanese Armed Forces, began plotting a southern rebellion. In May 1983, in Garang's hometown of Bor, soldiers mutinied, refusing to obey orders from their northern commanders. Numeri sent troops to crush the revolt. It was the opportunity Garang had been waiting for.
Numeri foolishly ordered the attack of Bor garrison, despite my personal warning that if you light fire, it will spread like bushfire and you will not be able to quench it. Leave those people alone.
In the face of attack from a large force of northern Sudanese, Garang joined the mutineers and led them into the bush to start a guerrilla movement. These are some of the survivors that left Bor to form the Sudan People's Liberation Army, the SPLA. Although the first few months of the SPLA were marked by infighting amongst its leaders, a decision taken in Khartoum would soon unite the warring factions.
Torabi played with the minds of the foolish military rulers. He made them to do for him what he could not do alone.
In September 1983, with Torabi at its core, the Numeri regime introduced a strict interpretation of Sharia law, which included punishments of limb amputation for crimes such as theft, stoning to death of women for adultery, and a ban on alcohol consumption.
Do you accept that the introduction of the September laws struck fear through the South?
I think it was only used as propaganda and struck fear thereafter. But it wasn't actually application, because bars were open all the time in Juba. Those days, I'm quite sure about that. When I went to Juba myself with Joseph Lago. And but security people sometimes, if they think you are subverting a public order for any reason, they might they might be as zealous Islamically oriented, like the Salafis, like the jihadists, all over the world.
When Numeri declared the Islamic Sharia, Torabi said, what would have taken us 100 years to achieve, he did it by stroke of the pen.
Hope of an end to conflict came in 1985. A general strike and mounting public anger led to President Numeri being overthrown while on a visit to the United States.
Washington itself.
Military rule was eventually replaced by a coalition civilian government headed by Sadiq al-Mahdi. But it wouldn't be long before rumors of yet another coup emerged.
I thought that a country with civil war, a country with conflict all over, a country with tension with its neighbors, no one would want to step into this hell.
He had reckoned without the ambition of Brigadier Omar al-Bashir. In September 1989, just as al-Mahdi was about to clinch an historic peace agreement with the SPLA, the military made their move.
The idea was that we'll meet on the 18th of September to clinch this. And one of their reasons for the coup was that they thought this was a conspiracy against Islam.
Unknown to al-Mahdi, it was his own brother-in-law Hassan al-Turabi who was behind the coup.
It was our soldiers, actually. And most of the people dressed, were not even soldiers at first. But later on, we allowed a few officers to take over.
So you controlled it?
We controlled it.
In the days leading up to the coup, Joseph Lago received a warning to get out of the country. This former rebel leader was tipped off that the democratically elected government of al-Mahdi was about to be overthrown.
I was tipped by Torabi that there was going to be problem and that I should get away from the Sudan.
Torabi gave you advance notice,
yes,
effectively,
yeah,
of a coup d'etat,
yeah,
and you did nothing about it.
Hmm?
You did nothing about it?
What can I do about it?
Make it public.
Why should I make it public? Why should I make it public? He gave me a hint. He says something is going to happen. Better get away.
As for Torabi's brother-in-law, Prime Minister Sadiq al-Mahdi, there was no warning.
What did your brother-in-law say to you?
Unfortunately, he was on very bad terms with me. He thought I was just taking power from him. And those days I was still I was not in office necessarily, but he knew that it's our movement, and I am the leader of that movement.
Garang now had to fight a civil war within the SPLA and continue to battle the Northern Army. President Bashir, on the other hand, experienced a golden period as the 20th century came to a close. Oil had been discovered in the border regions, boosting the Sudanese economy. Khartoum began to transform itself into a modern metropolis, and his popularity soared. But as Bashir's star rose, Hassan al-Turabi's influence declined, and soon he became a marginalized figure on the political wings. The discovery of oil has brought its own problems, because 80% of the reserves are in the south, and the pipeline goes north. And in the oil-rich region of Abyei, there's a dangerous territorial dispute that could explode at any moment. In Omar al-Fadli's restaurant in Khartoum, Darfurian performer Omar Essas sings of peace and unity in his troubled homeland. The United Nations says up to 300,000 people have died in Darfur, and 2.7 million have fled their homes. President Bashir, who puts the death toll at far fewer, just 10,000, has had an arrest warrant issued against him by the International Criminal Court on charges of war crimes. It's all a far cry from those heady days in 2005, when he and John Garang had joined together in peace. In the Nuba Mountains near the border between North and South, they still sing of that historic moment. But in a mausoleum in Juba, southern Sudan, lie the remains of John Garang, killed in a helicopter crash just 6 months after signing the peace agreement, and 3 weeks after over 1 million people had welcomed him to Khartoum.
Garang came with the idea that the Sudan should remain united. And he believed in that. Till he died, he believed in that. And he looked at the Sudan as a country, you know, that has a role to play. It is a linchpin of the whole continent.
Even his enemies knew that here was a man who had attempted to cross the divide that was Sudan.
He was a true leader. He inspired people around him. He was a towering figure. And I could see that even from my position on the other camp, because he was always an enemy. But no one could miss his leadership character and his abilities.
It was a great loss. Not for the SPLM, not for the South, but for the Sudan and for Africa.
Sudan was the giant of Africa, a great experiment to discover whether different religions and cultures could coexist together. Instead, it has become the land of broken dreams.
Arab don't respect us. The Arab don't give us our right. The Arab don't give us our dignity. They don't see us as people.